Hi, my name is Gretel, and today I will be presenting on Enterovirus D68, also known as EVD68. So a little bit of an overview about it. The virus is unenveloped. It is a positive single-stranded RNA virus. It is also a member of the Picornaviridae family. So this includes enterovirus, aphthovirus, cardiovirus, rhinovirus, and hepatovirus genera. This family of viruses can cause a range of diseases, including paralysis, meningitis, which is the inflammation of brain and spinal cord membranes caused by infection, and hepatitis, which is the inflammation of the liver caused by infection, and poliomyelitis, which is the destruction of nerve cells in the spinal cord, resulting in muscle wasting and paralysis. So EVD68 has specifically been associated with causing acute flaccid myelitis. I guess that's one of the major common misconceptions. It is not directly related to causing it. It just has been associated with that. And EVD68 is also just one of the 100 serotypes of non-polio enteroviruses that have been recognized. It is actually one of the less commonly identified and reported ones. So I have an image of the virus coming up, and here you go. It is unenveloped, positive single-stranded RNA. So a little bit about the symptoms. So it has an incubation period of between 1 to 5 days. They're not sure and they're not entirely specific about the number of days, but what they do know is that the period of communicability is between 1 day before till 5 days after the onset of symptoms. EVD68 has also been associated with causing severe respiratory illnesses or no symptoms at all. As you can see, mild symptoms exhibited is like runny nose, sneezing, cough, body aches, and muscle aches. So these are pretty much the same as the common cold. And because the symptoms are so similar, a lot of the times it just goes undiagnosed. So what happens then is that severe symptoms start to emerge, and especially in children with a history of asthma or wheezing, usually they have severe symptoms. So with diagnosis, since it is so similar to the common cold, there really is no characteristic symptom for a diagnosis in which doctors can clearly indicate okay, you have the virus. They have to run a specific lab test on respiratory specimens, but even then it's not readily available in hospitals. They have to send it to the CDC or some state health department. So there's always a fear of misdiagnosis, in which diagnostic tests might not detect the virus or might misidentify it as human rhinovirus, which is in that family of Picornaviridae. And regards to treatment, there's no specific treatment for it either. With severe cases, they do sometimes use mechanical ventilation. Most of them occur in the ICU, or most of the cases end up in the ICU, and some even require bi-level positive airway pressure ventilation, which is kind of like assisted or forced breathing, but I'll give you a picture of that later on. In terms of prevention, the CDC doesn't indicate any specific way to prevent the spread of this virus because it is so, it's around all the time, it's always present. There are months of fluctuation, but other than that, it's always present in the community. So they always recommend that you avoid close contact with sick people, you cover your mouth and your nose, that you clean and disinfect surfaces, that if you're sick, you stay at home. Because the number of cases occurs disproportionately in children aged 0 to 4, they do recommend that if you have especially a history of previous respiratory diseases like asthma or bronchiolitis and stuff like that, that you do abide by these protocols to prevent the spread of enterovirus or just to protect yourself from contracting it. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about specific case studies have indicated okay, the predominance of severe cases in children is because of their higher exposure, their lower prior immunity, and smaller airways. But there also have been cases where EVD68 has been identified in adults above the age of 20, which is rare. But in most, 80% of cases identified, there have been earlier complications, earlier respiratory, chronic illnesses or complications identified. So one case study that identified that was in the Netherlands in 2010. 12 patients, so 12 out of the 24 patients that were identified with EVD68 were above the age of 20. But again, within like this collect group, 80% of them had chronic underlying illnesses already. And a couple of them actually contracted it in the hospital. So that was an interesting case study. So a little bit about this virus. It was first discovered in 1962 in California. There was a group of 4 children who had bronchiolitis and pneumonia, but doctors couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. So upon further like research and breaking down of like the molecular characterization of the respiratory specimens that they collected, they identified EVD68. And in 2008 to 2010, they identified 6 clusters where this virus was collected in. So those 6 clusters were in Asia, Europe, and the United States. I have a little table down there that indicates just the number of cases in each area. So I guess the numbers, or like the table, is specific to 2009 to 2010, because they didn't really have a way of differentiating this virus before that. They like recently developed something in 2009 where they could differentiate it from bronchiolitis or any other respiratory like malfunction or illness. So that's why the numbers here are so specific in such like a small period. So a little bit about the incidents in the United States. So there have been cases in Atlanta, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Kansas City. But I think Chicago was the most interesting because 10 cases were admitted to the pediatric ICU. But 2 of those required mechanical ventilation and 2 required bi-level positive airway pressure ventilation. So this image below here is bi-level positive airway pressure ventilation. It's basically like aiding them in breathing. There is like a nose cover, but the mouth is left open. So this kind of like aids them as they breathe. And then mechanical ventilation is literally just like there's a tube that goes through your nose into your stomach and one that like comes out of your mouth. And it's just a machine that regulates that. So outside of the United States, in the Philippines, Japan, and Netherlands, there have been reported cases. In the Philippines, there were 816 suspected cases, but only 21, so like 2.6%, were found to be positive with EVD68. But unfortunately, out of the 21, even though it is a small number, there were 2 fatalities. Both cases were within the ages of 0 to 4. In Japan, there were only 11 cases, but still, there was 1 fatality. In the Netherlands, like I mentioned before, there were 24 patients, but half of those were above the age of 20, and 3 of the infections were acquired while in the hospital, which is interesting. So in summer and fall 2014, there was a recent outbreak in the United States. It was a nationwide outbreak of the EVD68, in which like 1,400 people in 49 states were identified with it. Almost all the confirmed cases were among children. They all had history of asthma or wheezing. So this was the first documented like nationwide outbreak of EVD68. So although the illness is associated with EVD68 is not notifiable, the circulation of this virus occurs most often in late summer and fall. So within the year, there are fluctuation periods. I am guessing that this may be because of temperature, but I'm not entirely sure on this end as well. So with that, there's a final word. The CDC warns that enteroviruses are ever present in the community. You can't really predict whether it'll be like a common type of enterovirus detected this year or in future seasons. You can't really indicate or predict which one it's going to be because there's a mixture that circulates every year. And every year they say that they expect to detect cases, but the number varies, and so they can't really say like which area to avoid. It's always ever present, and so they recommend that you're always alert and you're like keeping safe and preventing the spread of this. And if you're sick, that you have to stay home. Also, there's no clear-cut source since, as I mentioned previously, most of these cases of enterovirus are asymptomatic. It's like you exhibit symptoms of the common cold and then it either gets better and your body adapts to it and your immunity builds up, or it gets worse and then that's when they diagnose it. Other than that, there's no real like severe complication that occurs. And so yeah, with that, that's all I have to say about the presentation. Thank you very much.